arrogance, an attitude of superiority manifested in an overbearing manner or in presumptuous claims or assumptions. Few words describe the EU better than arrogant. If they lose a vote, they force another. If they can't force another vote, they turn into a vindictive, jealous ex-girlfriend. The EU dictates through bureaucracy and force. It projects an air of democracy, but there is very little democratic about it. Only the Commission can introduce legislation. The Parliament merely has the power to amend and vote on it. That means they can't repeal existing law, making them essentially powerless. The Commission makes all the rules. The Parliament is little more than cover for autocracy.
Who appoints the Commission, Matty?
Patience, short bus. I'm getting to it. Each member state of the EU appoints one person as their commissioner. Nobody votes on them directly. What could possibly go wrong? Clearly everything, because in the last 15 years the EU has done almost nothing right. It steadily eroded the freedoms of member states, caused the financial meltdown of national economies, and recently opened the borders to millions of welfare seekers from third world shitholes. Yet, despite inflicting endless suffering on the peoples of Europe, it continues to push its satanic goal of challenging God and setting up a European superstate. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the faces of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If, as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. The Tower of Babel's story is right at the start of the Bible, immediately after the story of Noah and the flood. It's one of the founding myths of our civilization. On the surface, it appears as though God is a little bit vindictive and jealous. After all, the people simply wanted a place where they can live and not be scattered and divided around the earth. That's reasonable, right? Why would God come down and mess all that up? Understanding God's motivation in this story can be difficult, but you need to look at it through the eyes of human nature. The story is a metaphor and a warning against attempting to create too much order. It's a warning against tyranny. Jordan Peterson explains this in his lecture series, Maps of Meaning.
I think it's Robin Dunbar. And one of the things that Dunbar has done is do a very in-detailed correlation analysis of cortical expansion and group size. And what he showed is that if you plot primates by cortical size, let's say you correct it for body size, you plot primates by cortical size, and then you plot the size of their social groups, you see a very tight relationship between the size of the social group and the size of the cortex. The optimal human social group is like 200 individuals, it's something like that, which is maybe roughly the number of people that you can reasonably track on Facebook. After that it's like, well, there's names, but you don't know those people. You're not capable of tracking social dynamics that are any more complex than that, partly because you have other problems to solve. And so one of the things that has been observed is that human groups tend to fractionate if they start to exceed 200. And maybe that's partly because you can't keep track of the complexity, but there's another constraint, which is you want your group to be big enough so that it protects you. But you want it to be small enough so that you can climb to the top. So when the group gets really, 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 really big, well, maybe it can protect you, although it also doesn't give a damn about you. Like once you're 1/60,000th of the group, like you are at the University of Toronto, or 1/30 millionth of the country, or maybe 1/300 millionth of Europe, which is partly why Europe is going to fragment, because that's just not enough, right? You're just not enough there. The group is too big. What happens? You keep aggregating the group. It gets more and more powerful, and you can think of that as something that has the capacity to replace the transcendent, right? We'll make a society that's perfect. It's like a utopian vision. That's what I see happening in this story. It's like we'll make something so great on the part of human beings that it will reach up to heaven itself, which means it will take the place of God. That's what it means. That's exactly what the communists did in Soviet Russia, and that's what they tried to do in China too. And so that's why you ended up with people like Stalin as the god. So you talk about getting what you deserve.
It's no coincidence this story appears immediately after Noah. The flood story is primarily a warning against nihilism, abandonment of morality, and descent into outright chaos. The Tower of Babel contrasts this as a warning against attempting to avoid chaos through tyrannical order. The European Union is an attempt at creating mass order over the European continent, a continent with a great amount of cultural diversity, actual diversity, not diversity. Show them the poster, Matty.
What poster? I want to see the poster!
Ah yes, I nearly forgot. This is a pro-EU propaganda poster from 1992. Something look familiar there? This poster was distributed all over the continent and only withdrawn after pressure from various Christian groups, but EU bureaucrats created it, and that's telling. Not only does it depict the Tower of Babel as a core part of the future European Parliament, it is dripping in satanic symbolism. The stars are inverted pentagrams, shapes often associated with Satanism, but not always. The tower itself has 13 levels. The number 13 is associated with rebellion against God and lawlessness. The people in the foreground all have blocks for heads, yet the baby's head is still round. This symbolises the EU's desire to transform children into building blocks of the EU. Mere slaves beneath the EU structure used to keep it upright, never allowed to think for themselves. It's their claim over the minds of European children. The slogan, Europe, many tongues, one voice, is a direct challenge to God in the Tower of Babel story. It's a call for the dispersed people to come together and unify under one structure. Make no mistake, the elites see themselves as above the Creator. They see themselves as greater than nature and in a position to challenge it. They don't even hide their arrogant delusions of divinity. As history clearly shows us, this won't end well. The EU is little more than a modern European empire, and empires always eventually collapse under their own weight. Tyrannical empire is not the natural order. As such, it cannot last. It will always fragment and ultimately collapse. There is no such thing as too big to fail. In fact, what the Tower of Babel story is telling us is that when things get too big, they always fail. This is exactly what we are seeing in Europe. A migrant crisis created by European elites is destabilising the region. Populist nationalist parties are rising. Britain are leaving the EU despite Theresa May's best efforts, and there are protests in the streets of Germany with young men demanding welfare migrants be sent back to their shithole countries. We're even getting stories like this out of Italy. Man who shot migrants after Italian teen's murder, unrepentant, say police. A right-wing extremist suspected in the shooting rampage that wounded 6 Africans in central Italy was lucid and determined, aware of what he had done, and exhibited no remorse for his actions, an Italian law enforcement official said Sunday. The fracturing has already begun. It's impossible to stop, and like all good tyrants, rather than accept reality and adjust to it, the EU is doubling down. Their desire to ban memes indicates exactly how they view this populist nationalist desire for freedom and independence. Migrants rape women en masse, crime is skyrocketing, ethnic enclaves and no-go zones have formed, and people are demanding their so-called leaders do their damn job and protect their borders. So what does the EU do? They ban people talking about it. The elites sit in their theft-funded ivory towers, safe and insulated from the suffering their policies cause. YouTubers Sargon of Akkad and Count Dankula recently took a trip to the EU Parliament in Strasbourg, and this is what they observed.
But they're a million miles away from all of the actual problems.
That's the problem as well. The people in this building are like, no, we're not causing any problems. Everything's absolutely fine. It's because you spent 24 hours a day surrounded by fucking affluence. Like, that's why they're literally, this is literally the ivory tower. And they're going, there are no problems. I didn't see any problems.
yeah, exactly. Are you sure you're not just being bigoted here? Have you considered that?
Real? Have you seen any since we arrived here?
Oh, yeah.
So it's almost like this area was purposely built so that none of them can afford to live here.
Yeah, and that's another thing, right? Paris, very diverse. Strasbourg,
No, not as...
not very diverse at all. Funny old world, isn't it?
Weird that. Weird.
Yeah, really strange.
It's almost like that was on purpose.
The EU is the Palace of Versailles, a shielded bubble of decadence and corruption funded by stealing money off the populace who suffer at their hands. If they aren't careful, European elites may well experience the same fate as the French aristocracy.
What do you mean by that, Manny?
You don't want to know, short bus. Regardless of how it happens, the EU is going to collapse because God demands it. It is an attempt at creating a structure that overrides our own nature. The natural order of a nation is that of familial groups connected through shared history, heritage and values. Any attempt at overriding nature through state violence will always eventually end in fragmentation and a return to the natural chaotic order. The rulers may enjoy a period of affluence for a time, for centuries in some cases, but nature always reasserts itself, often after much suffering. The EU is the modern embodiment of the Tower of Babel. Prepare yourself accordingly.
Oi, you got a license for that meme?
You got a license for that face?
I mean it. You'll get a very strongly worded letter if you're not careful.
Shove it up your strongly worded Strasbourg.
We just wanted to play video games.
Unironically, that's all I wanted.
And then you decided to start fucking with us. now we're in here.
Didn't want this to be the case, but lo and behold, this is what you get.
Hi everyone, really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, could you please share it around? That really helps me a lot. You could also donate some money via PayPal or Patreon if you really want to support my work. Otherwise, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of thing. Really thank you for watching my video and I'll see you when I see ya.